Welcome to The Explainer. You know, if you just glance at the daily news, the world looks completely chaotic, right? Just one crisis after another. But today, we're exploring some genuinely fascinating concepts from scholar Hedley Bull, who argues the exact opposite. We're going to uncover the invisible forces, this deep structural architecture that actually keeps the globe in order. It's a scaffolding so massive, we usually don't even notice it's there.
Seriously, think about it. Without a global police force or a world government to lay down the law, what is actually stopping the world from descending into absolute, unmitigated chaos? As we'll see today through Bull's analysis, world order is definitely not an accident. It's a highly deliberate, sometimes incredibly fragile structure held up by three totally invisible pillars.
Let's get into Act 1, the foundation, specifically the balance of power.
Okay, let's dive into this first pillar, the absolute raw physics of international politics. This is the classic definition provided by the philosopher Vattel. The balance of power is basically a state of affairs where no single nation is so overwhelmingly strong that they can just dictate the law to everybody else. And the really interesting thing here is that the primary goal isn't necessarily world peace. It's actually just about preventing a single universal empire from taking over and dominating the entire system.
Now, in the real world, this balance takes a couple different shapes. First, you have a simple balance. Think of the rigid standoff between the US and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. That requires a rough equality and actual strength. But then you have a complex balance. This is a much more fluid game of risk, involving three or more powers. Here, absolute equality isn't required at all. Weaker powers can dynamically team up, use some clever diplomacy, and combine their strength to keep the biggest guy in check.
And what's really fascinating is that in our modern complex balance, states aren't just competing on one level. They're literally playing on multiple chessboards simultaneously. You've got the board of strategic nuclear deterrence, the conventional military board, the economic and trade board, and even the board of ideological influence. And a weak position on one board can severely limit your moves on another. It's a massive, multidimensional puzzle.
Ultimately, this intricate game serves three really vital historic functions. It stops the world from becoming a single empire, it protects local states from getting swallowed up by regional bullies, and it provides the basic stability needed for diplomacy to actually work. But, and we have to be honest here, historically, this is a pretty brutal system. The overall structure of the top powers is frequently preserved at the direct expense and sometimes the complete partition of smaller, weaker states.
Moving on to Act 2, the extreme upgrade. Mutual nuclear deterrence. So, with the invention of nuclear weapons, that traditional balance of power we just talked about got a terrifying upgrade. It morphed into an intense psychological game. For deterrence to actually work, you have to hit three strict conditions. 1, you must convey a crystal clear threat. 2, your adversary must actually be considering the action you're trying to prevent. And 3, this is the big one, they must truly believe you have both the capacity and the absolute will to carry out that threat.
The crucial point here is profound. Traditional balance of power is an objective reality, right? It's based on how many actual troops or factories the state has. But nuclear deterrence, that is purely a subjective state of belief. It rests entirely on credibility, perception, and fear. I mean, theoretically, you could bluff your way through deterrence, but doing so carries, literally, the ultimate risk.
Now, unlike the simple balance of power, mutual nuclear deterrence doesn't actually require absolute mathematical equality in your weapons stockpile. You really just need a sufficient threshold of destructive capacity. If you can inflict a completely unacceptable level of damage on your enemy, even if they have way more missiles than you do, attacking you still becomes completely irrational.
And yes, this system has successfully made deliberate war between global powers completely irrational. But it has some terrifying limits. For one, it's highly vulnerable to sudden technological breakthroughs that could make current weapons or defenses totally obsolete. It also does absolutely nothing to prevent an accidental war, and worst of all, it leaves human survival dangling precariously on the massive historical gamble that world leaders will always act perfectly rationally. Which brings us to Act 3, the agreed fiction. What exactly is international law?
When we move from the raw muscle of nuclear fear to the actual rules of coexistence, we hit a massive wall of skepticism. The philosopher Thomas Hobbes famously laid this out perfectly when he wrote, "Where there is no common power, there is no law."
And that forces us to ask a pretty critical question. In a single country, you have the government and the police enforcing the law. But globally, there's no world government.
There's no global police force backing up the rules with undeniable power. So how can we even call it law?
Well, the answer is that international law functions essentially as a massive, high-stakes honor system. It relies heavily on decentralized self-help, the very real threat of reprisals, and the collective pushback of other nations. It works precisely because it's baked into the daily operations of an international society that desperately wants to maintain at least some semblance of order.
When you look at why states actually obey these rules, it rarely comes down to pure virtue. Sometimes it's just habit or institutional inertia. Sometimes, yeah, it's outright coercion by a stronger state. But the absolute most central, most powerful motive is reciprocal interest. States obey the rules because cooperation is mutually beneficial. They keep their promises simply because they want everyone else to keep theirs.
All right, let's look at Act 4, the inevitable clash, when law meets power.
So what happens when the raw imperatives of power inevitably grind against the strict rules of law? It creates a deep, unavoidable contradiction. See, the imperatives of international law demand that you wait for a legal injury to actually happen before you use force. But the imperatives of the balance of power demand preventive action. If a rival state is growing too strong and threatening the balance, power dictates you have to check them immediately, even if they haven't technically broken a single law yet. Which leads us to the ultimate messy reality of global politics. It's the grand paradox. International law absolutely depends on the balance of power to exist in the first place, because without a balance, a single superpower could just ignore the law completely. Yet, the actions required to maintain that very balance, like preventative wars or intervening in other countries, frequently require breaking international law. It's this dizzying, ironic loop that somehow keeps our world afloat. As you can see, world order is not some neat, tidy set of rules. It's a fragile, paradoxical scaffolding built on raw power, psychological fear, and agreed-upon fictions. So the question I'll leave you with today is this: can this deeply contradictory system actually survive the unprecedented complexities of our modern era? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.